Johnny Depp stood quietly in the convenience store, his hoodie blending him into the crowd, a stark contrast to the tension simmering around him. Nearby, a smug employee named Mark pocketed cash from the register with a grin, his arrogance practically daring anyone to challenge him. But what unfolded next would leave the store in stunned silence and spark a reckoning that could change everything. Before we dive into this powerful story, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. If you love gripping tales like this, don't forget to subscribe, cause tomorrow we've got another incredible story just for you. Johnny Depp sat in his private office, the city skyline stretching endlessly before him. He should have been satisfied his convenience store chain was thriving, his business decisions had brought stability, and his brand was stronger than ever. But beneath that success, something unsettled him. Months ago, while conducting a secret inspection at one of his restaurants, Johnny had uncovered a harsh reality. Employees were being exploited, underpaid, and in some cases mistreated due to their race. That day had changed him. He had fired corrupt managers, implemented strict oversight policies, and vowed to reshape his company into a place of fairness and integrity. But deep down, he knew one policy change wouldn't erase systemic corruption. If one store had these issues, how many others were hiding similar problems? He tapped his fingers on the desk, staring at the internal reports as his team had compiled employee complaints, wage discrepancies, ignored misconduct claims. Not all of it pointed to discrimination, but some patterns stood out, and Johnny wasn't the kind of man to ignore a problem once he saw it. That's why he was here now, preparing to go undercover again. This time, he chose a convenience store in a different district, one that looked fine on paper, but had subtle red flags. Employee turnover was unusually high, complaints about management were frequent, and customer reviews often mentioned poor service. He had to see it for himself. Changing into a simple hoodie and jeans, Johnny left his corporate office without fanfare. He took his own car, driving himself into the heart of the city, blending in as just another customer. He parked across the street from the store, watching for a few moments. A steady flow of customers entered and exited, but something about the employee movements felt tense. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. The store looked like any other, shelves stocked with snacks and drinks, soft music playing overhead. But Johnny had been in too many stores not to notice the details. The cashier, a black woman named Lisa, looked exhausted, her eyes darting toward the back of the store as if expecting trouble. A male employee, Mark, lingered by the register, his hands moving too casually, too deliberately. Something was off. Johnny grabbed a bottle of water and approached the counter, offering Lisa a small smile as she rang him up. Busy night, he asked, keeping his tone light. Lisa hesitated, glancing at Mark, who shot her a sharp look before disappearing into the back room. She forced a tight-lipped smile. Same as always, Johnny felt it, then the same unease had felt months ago in his restaurant, the weight of something hidden, something wrong. He had come to observe, to gather information before making a move. But as he saw Lisa's hand tremble slightly while giving him change, he knew one thing for sure: something was about to come to light, and this time he was ready to tear the corruption out from its roots. Johnny lingered near the store's entrance, pretending to examine a rack of snack bars, but his focus remained on Lisa and the uneasy atmosphere that hung in the air. He had spent years observing people, whether on film sets or in real life, and he could tell when something wasn't right. Lisa's exhaustion wasn't just from working long hours, it was the of something heavier, something oppressive. Mark reappeared from the back room, his expression unreadable. He glanced at Lisa, then at Johnny. For a brief moment, his eyes narrowed, as if assessing whether the newcomer posed a threat. Then, with forced casualness, he strode to the register and opened it. That's when Johnny saw it. Mark's hands moved with practiced efficiency as he pulled a handful of bills from the till and slipped them into his pocket. It wasn't just pocket change. Johnny recognized the quick, almost reflexive movement. This wasn't a one-time act. Mark had done this before, likely many times. Lisa saw it too. Johnny caught the brief flare of frustration in her eyes, the way her fingers clenched around the counter's edge, but she said nothing. Johnny stepped forward. Busy night, how he said, his tone casual. Mark barely spared him a glance. Yeah, something like that. Lisa's shoulders stiffened as if brace ing for a confrontation, but Johnny didn't push, not yet. Instead, he took his change and moved toward the drink coolers, giving himself a moment to think. This wasn't just about theft. The look Lisa had given Mark wasn't just disapproval, it was resignation, like she'd seen this happen too many times to count and knew there was nothing she could do about it. Johnny turned back to Lisa, keeping his voice low. How long has that been going on? Lisa hesitated. You don't want to get involved, I think I did. Johnny said. She studied him, probably trying to decide whether he was worth trusting. Eventually she said, her voice barely above a whisper, he's been skimming for months, but he's not the only one. Management knows they don't care as long as the cut keeps coming. Johnny's stomach tightened. He had suspected corruption, but hearing it confirmed made his blood simmer. What about corporate? Has anyone reported it? Lisa let out a bitter laugh. You think they don't already know? Johnny's jaw tightened. He had spent years building this company, and yet there were still people abusing the system, exploiting workers and protecting thieves like Mark. The issue wasn't just at this store, it ran deeper. Lisa looked around, then leaned and slightly. People who complain they get their hours cut, some get fired, and the worst part, she glanced at Mark, who was now chatting with another employee like nothing had happened. It's not just about money. People like me, we get treated worse, we get paid less, we get ignored. If you believe in acts of kindness and standing up for what's right, comment the number 6 below. Your support encourages us to share more powerful stories. The weight of her words settled heavily on Johnny. He had already seen how racial bias and corruption poisoned the restaurant division of his company. He had sworn to root it out, but it was bigger than he thought. It wasn't just happening in one location or one branch, it was the system itself. Johnny clenched his jaw. He had come here to observe, but that wasn't enough anymore. Lisa tilted her head. Why do you care so much? Johnny looked at her, his voice steady. Because I built this company, and I won't let people like Mark tear it down. Lisa blinked, realization dawning in her eyes. Johnny saw the exact moment she recognized him, not as a customer, but as the owner. Her lips parted slightly, a mix of surprise and something else. Before she could say anything, the store's back door swung open and a man in a pressed button-down shirt stepped out. The manager. He took one look at Lisa and Johnny, then at Mark, who was still near the register. His expression darkened. Johnny had been noticed, and from the way the manager's eyes locked onto him, he knew one thing for certain: the real fight was just beginning. The moment the manager stepped out of the back office, the air in the store shifted. Johnny recognized that kind of presence immediately, the kind that demanded control, not through respect but through quiet intimidation. The man's name tag read Dawson. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of stiff posture that suggested he saw himself as more important than he was. His gaze locked onto Johnny, then flickered toward Lisa before finally settling on Mark. The way Mark suddenly straightened, adjusting his stance like a soldier falling into line, told Johnny everything he needed to know. Dawson wasn't just another store manager, he was part of the corruption Lisa had hinted at. Dawson forced a smile, didn't expect to see a new face this late at night. His tone was polite, but his eyes were calculating. Johnny matched his expression, staying casual, just grabbing a drink. Seemed like an interesting place. Dawson's gaze lingered a moment longer before he turned to Lisa. Lisa, you finished restocking the shelves? Lisa's lips pressed together almost. Dawson, his smile thinned. Then why are you standing? Hurry, patting. Johnny saw the small but undeniable shift in Lisa's posture, the way her fingers curled slightly, the tension in her shoulders. It was a reaction to something deeper than simple workplace pressure. It was the reaction of someone who'd been put in her place one too many times. Johnny stepped in. I was just asking Lisa a question. Dawson's eyes snapped back to him, and for the first time there was a flicker of uncertainty. Oh, Johnny took a slow sip from the bottled water he grabbed. Yeah, about the store. He let the silence stretch just long enough to make Dawson uncomfortable. How things are run here? Dawson's smile didn't waver, but his fingers twitched slightly at his side. Everything's run by the book. We keep a tight ship. Johnny nodded, then gestured toward Mark. That's so, because I just saw your guy here skimming cash from the register. The moment the words left his mouth, the entire room seemed to freeze. Mark's face drained of color. Lisa inhaled sharply. Dawson's, to his credit, barely flinched, but there was something in his eyes, something cold and assessing. Dawson's chuckled, shaking his head. You must be mistaken. I don't think I am, Johnny said, voice steady. And Lisa here? Well, I bet she's seen it too. Lisa stiffened, but before she could speak, Dawson cut in. Lisa's had a long shift. I'm sure she wouldn't want to make accusations she can't prove. Johnny tilted his head. You sure about that? Dawson's mask of politeness cracked just slightly. Look, buddy, I don't know who you think you are. I know exactly who I am, Johnny said. His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge beneath it. He pulled out his phone and tapped a few buttons. And right now I'm looking at some interesting numbers from this location. A little irregular, don't you think? Dawson's mouth tightened. I also know that employee complaints about wage discrepancies and favoritism from this store have been ignored by corporate. Johnny continued, his voice not rising, but carrying weight. I know that workers who speak up mysteriously have their hours cut. He glanced at Lisa. And I know for a fact that my company doesn't tolerate theft or discrimination. Mark took a small step back. Dawson's expression darkened, but he wasn't a fool. He was processed, recalculating. Then finally the realization hit. Johnny watched as Dawson's breath hitched slightly. The moment he recognized him, not as some random customer, but as Johnny Depp, the owner of the entire damn company. Lisa saw it too for the first time that night. A small triumphant smile touched her lips. Dawson swallowed, straightening his tie. Mr. Depp, if there's been a misunderstanding— Oh, there's no misunderstanding, Johnny interrupted. The only question is how deep this go, and whether you're going to cooperate. Dawson's jaw clenched. He was cornered. He knew it. Mark knew it. Lisa knew it. The weight of Kiana's presence, the power behind his words, pressed into the space between them, and just like that, the cracks in Dawson's carefully controlled world began to shatter. The silence in the store was suffocating. Dawson's face remained frozen in a forced calm, but the tension in his jaw gave him away. Mark had retreated, his hands gripping the edge of the counter as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. Lisa stood stiffly beside Johnny, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Johnny let the silence stretch, watching Dawson struggle to regain control. He had seen men like him before, people who built their authority on fear, who thrived on the idea that no one would dare challenge them. But tonight that illusion was crumbling. Finally, Dawson exhaled through his nose and forced a smile. "Mr. Depp," he started, his voice tight, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Johnny raised an eyebrow. "A misunderstanding?" He gestured toward the register where Mark had been caught red-handed. "Because I saw exactly what happened, and I don't think I'm the only one." Lisa shifted beside him. He could feel her hesitation, the weight of years of being ignored, dismissed, or worse, punished for speaking up. Dawson's gaze flickered toward her, sharp and warning. "Lisa, you've worked here a long time. You know how things run." Lisa swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward Johnny before settling on Dawson. "Yes," she said softly, then more firmly, "I do." Dawson's expression wavered for just a second. Johnny seized the moment. "Then Leighton, talk about that," he said, turning to Lisa. "Tell me what's been going on here." Lisa hesitated. Johnny could see the battle play out inside her, the fear of retaliation against the desperate need to finally be heard. Mark scoffed, shaking his head. "Oh, come on, you really think she's going to?" "I do." Johnny cut in sharply. "Because this ends tonight." Lisa inhaled deeply, then straightened her spine. "All right," she said, her voice clear. "Now you want the truth? Fine." She turned to Johnny. "For months we've been shorted on our paychecks, hours that we work just disappearing from the system, and when we ask about it, we get excuses or told we must miscalculated." Johnny's expression darkened. "Who's responsible for payroll?" Lisa glanced at Dawson. "Him." Dawson bristled. "That's absurd." "Is it?" Lisa shot back. "Because every time someone questions it, their hours suddenly get cut. Or worse." She gestured toward the door. "They don't have a job anymore." Johnny folded his arms, his stare unrelenting. "And corporate complaints?" Lisa let out a bitter laugh, ignoring him. "I filed one myself. Got an email saying they'd look into it. That was 3 months ago. And you know what happened next?" She jabbed a finger toward Mark. "I started getting the worst shifts, night shifts alone, stocking shelves for hours with no break." Dawson's face darkened enough. His voice was sharp now, his patience wearing thin. "Lisa, you're making serious accusations. Do you really want to do this?" Canano took a step forward, his presence overwhelming. "She's not making accusations. She's telling the truth." And him listening, his voice was low, controlled, but there was an undeniable steel beneath it. Mark shifted uncomfortably. "Look, man, I was just doing what I was told. Everyone knows if you don't play along, you get AED." Dawson's turned on him sharply. "Shut up." But it was too late. The cracks had widened. The carefully maintained order of the store of Dawson's control was falling apart. Johnny turned back to Lisa. "Anyone else willing to speak up?" Lisa hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah," she said, her voice stronger now. "Because we're done being scared." For the first time, real fear flickered in Dawson's eyes. He opened his mouth, but Johnny cut him off. "You've been stealing from your own employees," Johnny said, his voice dangerously quiet, "and now you're going to answer for it." Dawson took a step back. The chime of the store's door opening interrupted him. A man in a suit walked in, his sharp eyes scanning the room. Johnny didn't need an introduction. He had made a few calls before confronting Dawson. The corporate auditor had arrived, and the reckoning was just beginning. The moment the corporate auditor stepped inside, the entire atmosphere in the store shifted. The power Dawson's had wielded for so long drained from his face, replaced by a thinly veiled panic. Johnny didn't move, standing firm with Lisa by his side. Mark shrank back, suddenly aware that his part in this was about to come under scrutiny. The auditor, a sharp-edged man in his late 50s, adjusted his tie and glanced around. His gaze landed on Johnny first, then Dawson. "Mr. Depp," he said, extending a hand. "I'm James Holloway, corporate compliance." Johnny shook his hand. "You got here fast. When the owner of the company calls, I don't take my time." Holloway turned to Dawson, his expression unreadable. "We receive reports of payroll manipulation, employee mistreatment, and possible embezzlement. I assume you have an explanation." Dawson's mouth opened and closed. "There must be some mistake." Lisa let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, the mistake was thinking you could keep getting away with it." Holloway gave her an approving nod. "Miss Lisa," she said, lifting her chin, "been working here 4 years, long enough to see everything." Holloway pulled a small notepad from his jacket. "Then I'd like to hear what you have to say." Dawson's face turned red. "You can't just I can." Holloway interrupted coolly. "Mr. Depp owns this company. If he has reason to believe there's corruption in his stores, I investigate." He glanced at Johnny. "And from what I'm seeing, this one's overdue." Johnny nodded. "Lisa and the other employees deserve better. I want every payroll discrepancy reviewed. If Dawson's been cutting wages, well, reimburse the workers. If there's proof of theft, I want legal action pursued." Holloway's gaze flicked back to Dawson, who was now sweating. "You'll need to provide all financial records for review." A Mark shifted uncomfortably. "Look, man, it wasn't just him." Everyone turned toward him. Mark's voice wavered, but he pushed forward. "Yeah, I skimmed, but it was part of the system. People above Dawson, corporate-level managers, they knew they let it happen as long as the store hit its numbers. No one cared how it got done." A silence fell over the room. Even Holloway looked momentarily surprised. Johnny exhaled slowly. He had suspected corruption beyond just one store, but hearing it confirmed was different. Holloway adjusted his tie again. "That Changes things. Johnny's jaw tightened. Then we don't just clean up this store, we clean up the whole system. He turned to Lisa. You were ignored before, not anymore. I want you and the others to be part of this. We fix it together. Lisa's eyes widened. For the first time, there was hope. You mean that? Johnny nodded, every word. Dawson sagged, knowing it was over, and the real battle was just beginning. Johnny sat at the back office desk, flipping through the payroll records. Holloway had pulled the numbers, didn't lie. Wages had been cut, hours had been manipulated, and money had disappeared. But the most damning part, the pattern stretched beyond this single store. Lisa stood next to him, arms crossed. Told you it wasn't just Dawson, the whole system's rotten. Holloway said, rubbing his temple. The evidence points to corruption beyond just store managers. We're talking regional directors, maybe higher. Johnny's fingers drummed against the desk. He had built this company with the idea that it would be different, that it would be a place where people were treated fairly, but now the company had been twisted into something he didn't recognize. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I don't want to defend Dawson, but he wasn't at the top of this. He did what he had to do to keep his job. Lisa's had him a glare. Yeah, and the rest of us had to suffer for it. Mark looked down. He had no defense. Johnny exhaled sharply and turned to Holloway. How deep does this go? Holloway flipped through more reports. Payroll manipulation, unauthorized deductions, and employee terminations tied to whistleblowing. Bet regional managers were ordered to meet certain cost-cutting goals without regard for ethics. The question is, who gave the order? Johnny's jaw clenched. He already knew what had to be done. We're not stopping here. If this corruption goes all the way up, we're taking it down. Lisa raised an eyebrow. You really think you can? Johnny met her gaze. I know I can. There was a knock at the door. A young cashier, no older than 20, peeked inside nervously. Yes, sir. There's someone outside asking for you. Says he's from corporate. Johnny exchanged a look with Holloway that was fast. Lisa muttered, guess they realize they can't ignore us anymore. Johnny stood. Let's see what they have to say. Yes. They walked to the front. A man in a tailored suit waited near the registers, scanning the store with cold detachment. He looked like he belonged in a boardroom, not a convenience store. He turned when he saw Johnny, his expression unreadable. Mr. Depp. And David Langley, Senior Operations Director. I understand you've been conducting an investigation. Johnny folded his arms. That's right. Langley's smile was forced. ID preferred to handle this matter quietly, perhaps in my office. Johnny shook his head. No, we do this here in front of the people who've been affected. Lisa smirked. You were kind of done with backroom deals. Langley's jaw tightened. Very well, but I should warn you, what you're doing, it has consequences. Johnny didn't flinch yet, but for once those consequences won't fall on the workers. Langley's expression darkened. Well, see about that. Johnny stood firm, facing David Langley as the tension in the store thickened. Employees had gathered around, sensing that something important was happening. Lisa stood beside him, arms crossed, while Holloway observed from a few steps back, taking mental notes. Mark, still uncertain where he truly stood in all this, lingered nearby, his expression unreadable. Langley smoothed the lapels of his expensive suit and sighed, as if this entire situation was a minor inconvenience. Mr. Depp, I understand you have concerns, but you must also understand that running a business requires difficult decisions. The measures we've implemented have ensured profitability and kept stores open. Johnny's eyes narrowed. At what cost? Exploiting workers, firing employees for speaking up, cutting wages while managers skim off the top. Langley's expression didn't waver. Business is about efficiency. You know that. Lisa scoffed. Efficiency? That's what you call stealing from us. Langley didn't even glance at her. He kept his focus on Johnny, as if the others didn't matter. Let's not turn this into something emotional. I assume you have proof, but I'd caution you against acting too hastily. There are ramifications for stirring up trouble where it isn't necessary. Johnny folded his arms. Are you threatening me? Langley's smile was tight. I'm simply advising you to think carefully. Publicity like this, it's bad for business. It creates instability. The board won't like it, and neither will our investors. You may own this company, but you don't control everything. There are forces at play that go beyond you. Johnny could feel the weight of every employee's gaze on him. Lisa's knuckles were clenched, and Mark shifted uncomfortably. He took a deep breath and spoke calmly but firmly. You're right about one thing. I don't control everything, but I do control how my business treats people, and I refuse to let this corruption keep spreading. Langley's smirk faded slightly. That's a bold stance, one that could cost you. Johnny stepped closer. I've already paid the price for staying silent. Once I won't do it again. For the first time, Langley's confidence flickered. His gaze darted around at the employees, watching the growing sense of rebellion in their eyes. He exhaled sharply and straightened his tie. This conversation isn't over, he said quietly. He'll be in touch with that. He turned on his heel and strode out of the store. Silence hung in the air for a moment before Lisa finally spoke. So what now? Johnny looked at her, then at the others. Now we fight back. We take this higher. We expose everything. A murmur of agreement rippled through the employees. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. Johnny sat in his office, his hands resting on a thick folder of documents. Holloway had compiled evidence of fraud, wage theft, and systematic discrimination spread across pages of financial reports, internal emails, and employee testimonies. It was undeniable. Langley and his network had been siphoning money and punishing workers who dared to resist. Lisa sat across from him, her eyes scanning the documents. This isn't just one store, she muttered. This is the entire system. Holloway nodded. We've traced transactions leading back years. Mark wasn't the only one skimming from registers. He was just a small part of it. Higher-ups have been padding their own paychecks while slashing hours for workers, and the worst part, HR has been complicit. Complaints were ignored, records were altered, anyone who pushed back was forced out. Johnny exhaled sharply. They thought no one would dig this deep. Lisa shook her head, anger flashing in her eyes. And now they're scrambling, because they know we are. At that moment, Mark entered, his face pale. He hesitated, then shut the door behind him. I need to talk to you, he said, his voice unsteady. Johnny gestured to a chair. Go ahead. Mark sat, wringing his hands. Langley came to see me, he admitted, offered me a deal, said if I kept my mouth shut, he'd make sure I got promoted, more money, better hours. He's scared. Lisa crossed her arms. And what did you say? Mark hesitated, shame creeping into his face. I told him I needed to think about it. Silence filled the room. Johnny studied him carefully. And what do you really want? Mark swallowed hard. I don't want to be part of this anymore. I know what I did was wrong, but I was stuck. You know, it's not an excuse. But he trailed off, guilt hanging over him. Johnny nodded slowly. Then make it right. Help us. Mark glanced at the folder, then back at Johnny. How? Holloway leaned forward. Tell us everything you know, every conversation, every shady deal. We need someone from the inside. Mark exhaled shakily, then nodded. Okay. Him and Johnny stood, placing a firm hand on Mark's shoulder. Then Leighton and this corruption for good. Lisa's watching, gave a small nod. The fight wasn't over, but the tides were shifting. Johnny sat in the dimly lit back office of one of the stores, staring at the growing mountain of evidence, employee testimonies, financial statements, emails. Everything pointed to a network of corruption that had festered for years. His jaw clenched. This wasn't just about a few bad managers. This was a system designed to exploit and silence the very people who kept his stores running. Across the desk, Lisa sat with her arms. See, we have enough to take this to the authorities, she said, her voice firm. Langley and his people will go down for this. Holloway nodded. We should act quickly. The longer we wait, the more time they have to cover their tracks. Johnny exhaled, rubbing his temples. I know, but we need to be strategic. If we rush this, they'll find a way to spin it. I don't just want them fired, I want them held accountable. Mark, sitting at the far end of the room, cleared his throat. He still looked nervous, but there was a determination in his eyes. Langley called me again today. He admitted he's panicking. He thinks I'm still on his side. He wants me to help him move some sensitive files out of the system. Lisa's eyes narrowed. He's destroying evidence. Johnny sat up straighter. Then let's use that. Mark, if you're willing, I need you to play along. Let him think you're cooperating, but we'll be watching. Mark hesitated, then nodded. I'll do it. Olai leaned forward. We need to be careful. If Langley gets even a hint that we're on to him, hell, shut everything down. We need hard proof before we strike. Johnny stood, his expression resolute. Then Leighton, get it, this ends now. The team exchanged glances, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. The next few days would be critical. If they failed, Langley and his people would walk away free to continue their exploitation, but if they succeeded, if they could expose everything, then real change would finally begin. Lisa's exhaled sharply. No more waiting, no more silence. Leighton, bring them down. Johnny met her gaze and nodded. It's time. The morning air was thick with tension as Johnny stepped into the store. Today was the day the plan had been set in motion. Mark had played his part, leading Langley to believe he was still an ally. The corrupt regional manager had scheduled a visit, unaware that his downfall was imminent. Lisa and Holloway waited near the back office, their expressions grim, but determined. They had gathered enough evidence, stolen wages, forged reports, records of employees being tired for speaking out. All of it had been documented, ready to be handed over to the authorities. At exactly 10 a.m., Langley strutted in his usual arrogance and tact. He barely acknowledged the employees, heading straight for the office where Mark waited. Johnny and Holloway exchanged a glance. It was time. Mark played his role perfectly. Everything's ready, he told Langley, motioning toward a flash drive. Just like you asked. Langley smirked. Good, we can't afford loose ends. He reached for the drive, only for Johnny to step into the room. Loose ends. Johnny's voice was calm, but the edge in his tone was unmistakable. Langley froze, his eyes darted to Mark, then to the others standing behind Johnny. Lisa crossed her arms, her stare piercing. Holloway held up a file, the irrefutable proof of Langley's corruption. What is this? Langley scoffed, trying to mask his fear. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Johnny cut him off. You spent years exploiting your employees, threatening them, stealing from them. It ends today. Langley sneered, but there was panic in his eyes. You have no proof. Lisa stepped forward. We have everything, financial records, employee testimonies, emails. You thought no one would notice, but we did. At that moment, uniformed officers entered the store. Langley's face drained of color. You're under arrest, one officer announced as Langley was led away in cuffs. A hush fell over the store. Employees peeked from behind counters, eyes wide with shock and relief. Johnny turned to them. This company belongs to its people. No one will ever be mistreated here again. Lisa exhaled, a slow smile forming. Justice had been served, and this was just the beginning. Racism and corruption do not thrive in isolation. They persist when good People look away when silence is chosen over justice. Johnny had seen it before, and he refused to let it continue. Change starts with action. It starts with standing up, speaking out, and refusing to accept inequality as just the way things are. Johnny knew this fight wasn't over, but today they had won a battle, and that meant a better tomorrow was possible. This isn't just Johnny's fight, it's a fight that happens in workplaces across the country. What do you think needs to change? And more importantly, what small act of kindness can you do today to stand up for fairness and justice? Share your thoughts, your experiences, and let's talk about real solutions, because together even the smallest gestures can break the cycle. The story of Johnny's fight against corruption and discrimination in his company reveals profound messages about justice, accountability, and the power of action. One key lesson is that systemic issues like racism and exploitation thrive in silence and indifference, but they can be dismantled when individuals refuse to look away. Johnny's determination to confront wrongdoing, even at personal risk, teaches us that courage is essential to create change. His decision to involve Lisa and others highlights the importance of amplifying marginalized voices, showing that true progress requires collaboration and empathy. Additionally, the story underscores that leadership is not about power or profit, but about integrity, holding oneself and others accountable no matter how deep the corruption runs in daily life. We can apply these lessons by standing up against unfairness, whether at work, school, or in our communities. It starts with small acts: listening to those who are ignored, questioning unethical practices, or supporting someone in need. Like Johnny, we must recognize that change isn't easy, but it's necessary. By acting with purpose and compassion, we can break cycles of injustice and build a world where fairness isn't just a promise but a reality.